Hey everyone, it is Yishan here, back with another video, and today I am going to be talking about priority in Edison Format and why you should stop using it. Here, I feel like a lot of players in Edison Format, they're using priority like it's an airport lounge, okay? Trying to use it all the time, any situation, priority, just saying priority because let's be honest, saying priority is one of the joys of playing Edison Format. It feels cool, feels unfair, but in this video, I'm going to tell you to, think a little bit before you use priority. Maybe stop using it on some cards altogether. And so let's get right into it. Don't be like these people in the airport lounge. Think critically. What do we got here? Okay, so let's review first. What is priority? There's a lot of stuff. People talk a lot about the rules, but they don't actually know what they are. So in this video, we're really only going to be focusing on ignition effect priorities. So that's like cards like Dark Grepher. People say priority, or Judgment Dragon, or Dark Arm Dragon priority. Just like I can use this before you bottomless me kind of thing, or torrential me kind of thing. Okay, so you got to know when you have priority. That's the first thing to know about priority. And it happens after a monster is summoned without starting a chain. So like, if you normal summon Stratos, activate its effect to search, that is started a chain, there's no more priority. But if you normal summon Stratos, or don't use the effect, then you do have priority, right? Because a monster was summoned, no chain was started. Now, this monster can be summoned by like a game mechanic like Cyber Dragon, right? That doesn't start a chain, but it can also be summoned as Chainlink 1. So like think like, Call of the Haunted. If you activate Call of the Haunted as Chainlink 1, when that monster is summoned, you have ignition effect priority, right? And the final thing to understand is that it doesn't have to be the monster that was summoned. So for example, if you have a Plague Spreader zombie in your graveyard, right, that's an ignition effect. An ignition effect is any effect where you just basically, you can only use it during your main phase 1, and you say you activate it, right? There's no like trigger, there's no like, timing, you say you activate it. So kind of like you activate it like a spell card almost. So like Plague Spreader is a great example, right? Where you can normal summon a monster, priority, I want to use Plague Spreader zombie, and then you can chain torrential, right? That's like that's cool little thing. Torrential will resolve first, your Plague Spreader will come onto the field, and then life is good if that's what you're looking for. So it doesn't have to be the monster that was summoned, right? So that's a big one. And last reminder, if an effect triggers, no priority, right? So you can't activate Stratos and do the same thing, or swap Frog, or do the same like Plague Spreader torrential trick as I said before. No priority if you activate a trigger effect. Okay, so I think we've gone through a little bit of a refresher. Maybe the one that people miss a lot is this monster summoned as Chainlink 1. So a lot of people miss this, and so we'll go over some examples later. But let's talk about what I think is the #1 priority offender. And, we should be starting arresting these priority offenders, is Lyla, the Lightsworn Sorceress. The amount of times people use priority on this card is staggering. When I would say 80 to 90% of the time, you should not be using priority on Lyla, right? So first thing is to ask yourself why, right? When you use priority, you should be gaining something, right? So what do you gain from doing priority? Because if you use priority on Lyla, you have to target when you summon it, right? So you're already doing two things. You have to target something, so you're giving away information on what you're going to target, and you're signaling to the opponent that you're not going to attack, right? It's because it has to change the defense to pop. So that's the key thing that maybe people don't understand about Lyla. Lyla must change the defense to pop. So there are almost no cases where if your opponent has a card they want to stop Lyla, that you using priority will change anything. If your opponent wants to stop Lyla and they have the card to stop it, it doesn't really matter if you use priority or not, Lyla will be getting stopped. So all you're doing is giving your opponent free information. You're telling your opponent, this is what I'm going to target with Lyla, and I'm not going to attack, right? And so here's like a simple example. Imagine you have a Jar of Greed and a bottomless, and your opponent normal summons Lyla. If they use priority, you're so happy, because if they target the bottomless, well, you'll just chain it anyway, right? That's no biggie. But if they target the Jar of Greed, you get to go +1, right? And then you're happy and you say, woo, yay! Like I just chained Jar to a pop effect. That's fantastic, right? But now if you don't use priority, your opponent, they summon a Lyla, don't use priority. Now you actually have to decide, do I want to bottomless Lyla, or do I want to gamble on the 50-50 that the Lyla targets the Jar of Greed, or even maybe just attacks, right? And so there's a lot of things that could go wrong here. And so this is just one example out of many where I see okay, there really is no reason to use priority on Lyla, because Lyla must change the defense to pop, right? So bottomless, you bottomless, and even if they targeted something else besides the bottomless, it won't pop because the Lyla didn't change the defense, and so on and so forth. So the biggest defender is Lyla. Just when you summon this card next time, ask yourself, do I really want to use priority? And really, you probably don't, okay? So there are some more guilty cards where I think they're not as bad as Lyla, where Lyla you should almost never use priority. There are some cards that are maybe less strict. And so I got a couple here. We'll go over them, and these are just some examples. Elemental Hero Prisma. This card does not send its cost in Edison format. So the problem is that, and it also has to be face up on the field to resolve, right? So again, it kind of has that Lyla problem where, why are you letting your opponent decide? You have to commit to sending on summon if you use priority. Whereas if they bottomless you anyway, you don't get any send or effect with Prisma. So there's no real point in using Prisma's effect on summon. So again, you're just giving away free information when you shouldn't, right? What if you always summon this card and always use priority, right? And then the one time you summon it, you don't use priority, and it actually is because you have no targets. You're again giving away free information, right? Whereas if you have if you don't have targets, but your opponent doesn't know that because you say, I'm not going to use priority, they may sort of treat the summon of Elemental Hero Prisma differently. Dimensional Alchemist, this is kind of a similar thing, and we'll get to this topic later, which is this card will make itself miss timing because it's a when optional effect. So if you activate priority, your opponent can chain torrential, and Dimensional Alchemist will miss timing with its own effect, which is kind of funny. So probably don't want to use priority on that. I think a lot of the fairy players sort of are already aware of this. And then lastly is Bryonic. I see a lot of people make Bryonic to force out one back row, right? So in that situation, if you're just afraid of bottomless or torrential and you don't really want to discard cards in your hand, if you summon Brio, they're going to have to bottomless or torrential anyway. If you're trying to clear the back row, you might as well just hold the cards in your hand, right? If they have bottomless and it's the only back row they have, they bottomless, and then you just say, okay, well, I save a card in my hand. I'm not saying that Brio is a card a lot of the time where you do want to use priority. You want to bounce a monster on summon, so even if they have bottomless, you still get to bounce a monster, that sort of thing. I'm just saying, think a little more critically about it, because you don't want to use priority all the time. Although I will say Bryonic, you do want to use a priority a decent percentage of the time, but just think critically, because not always, right? So this is more of a PSA. Just do a little thinking before you activate Bryonic. Now, if you're there and you're a pretty smart Edison player, you may be already typing up a storm. You may already be mad at me because you say, Yishan, there's a case where I want to use priority on all these cards, like Lyla, like Prisma, all these other things. And you are right. There is one exception to the rule. I wouldn't even say it's minor. There's a pretty big exception, which is a lot of times you want to make stuff miss timing, right? Missing the timing. This is a classic, what the heck is Konami doing sort of thing. But, this is a rule for these optional trigger effects, these when optional trigger effects. And in those cases, you may want to use Lyla. For example, if you have basically a torrential is a big one, right? If I'll go with the second bullet point first. If you have a Lyla, your opponent has a Dimensional Alchemist and an Oppression and a torrential. In this situation, you kind of know, okay, if I get rid of the Oppression, my whole hand is Lyla. I'm going JD, Christia, whatever, right? And so in this case, it may be okay to use priority, right? Because, if your opponent chains torrential, they are going to have to lose their own Dimensional Alchemist or anything that could miss timing in that sense, right? And so you will want to use priority because your priority will be chain link 1, torrential will be chain link 2, torrential will resolve, destroy everything, and then Lyla will resolve and make all the stuff that should trigger then miss timing. So trying to make things miss timing, priority makes a lot of sense. Kind of same with, Bryonic and torrential. Torrential's a big one here. A lot of missing timing, but even if you have a Lyla, you want to use it and then chain Raigeki Break or something to kill something or something like that, right? So you just try to make stuff miss timing, then yes, you do want to activate the effect before your opponent can really do anything, basically. So there's that. Those are sort of the things I would say is like there's an exception. If it makes sense to use priority on certain cards when you're trying to make stuff miss timing. So that's the exception. I've acknowledged it. It's an important thing. Making stuff miss timing, can be the difference between a won game and a lost game. So there it is. Okay, let's talk about priority that should almost always be used. I did not write this slide correctly. This should say almost always be used. Like, cards like Substitute, Lone Fire Blossom, Card Trooper. You probably want to use priority on these cards. It's just like there's not really a good reason not to. For Substitute, you let your opponent like be able to Book of Moon it or compulse it if you don't do it, or even stuff like Torrential. It's just like you want to use priority. Get that Swap Frog, get that Treeborn in rotation kind of thing. Card Trooper is kind of similar. If you want to mill, then you really should basically. And there's really no good reason not to. So that's sort of my take on the matter. Unless, for example, you have Card Trooper and you have monsters that may miss timing, right? Like, for example, there are exceptions, right? Like, let's say you have a card that could miss timing. When you normal summon Card Trooper, if you want to play around Torrential, don't use priority, right? Because other like there's really you'd rather get the effect of the card that may miss timing. So Card Trooper, there are exceptions, but probably you should be using priority most of the time on these cards. Just think about it, okay? That's kind of the point of this video, is to just think about it. So just give it a little pause and consideration. Okay, finally, priority that people always forget to use. People never use priority on these cards, and I don't understand why. Because it's pretty useful. Biggest offender, Destiny Hero Malicious. #1 offender, okay? If you activate Foolish Burial and send Malicious, you don't get priority. Why? Because no monster was summoned, okay? But for example, if you discard Malicious with Dark Refer, you can activate Malicious before anything happens, like before your opponent can DD Crow because it banishes cost. You get the Malicious out of your graveyard. Same kind of thing with like Polymerization, right? If you activate Polymerization, you send Malicious and Treeborn for a lot of these Polymerization hero decks, you summon Absolute Zero, before your opponent can DD Crow, you can activate Malicious, okay? So, because remember, Polymerization is Chainlink 1, on resolution, it summon a monster, therefore you have Ignition Effect priority, you can use any Ignition Effect you would like, because there's no trigger effects, right? So, second, final thing, I guess, to make things clear, if the monster is summoned as Chainlink 2, you don't get priority. For example, if I go Chainlink 1, Jar of Greed, Chainlink 2, Call of the Haunted, there's no Ignition Effect priority because when the monster is summoned, there's still one more chain to resolve. The Jar of Greed resolves, there's no priority, okay? So all I'm saying is, just be aware of stuff that you can use. Like, a lot of graveyard effects people forget to use. It's really, graveyard effects. You do have priority, and so use it when you can to play around DD Crow and stuff like that. All right, that's all I got, guys. I think this was a very sort of just a compilation of stuff I've learned after playing Edison Format for a little. I hope it can help you guys out there. If you take away anything from this video, just relax on using priority on Lyla. That's like the main offender. Otherwise, use priority to make stuff miss timing. And I think you might win a couple more Edison games that way. All right, guys, that's all I got for today. I hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will see you all in the next one.